Hi, I'm Venna, and my family didn't just forget me, they erased me. They sold my car without asking, auctioned off my uniform like it meant nothing, removed my name from the family trust, and somehow still expected me to smile in the background of their perfect holiday photos. But the worst part? They didn't scream. They didn't fight. They just quietly, strategically, wrote me out. So what do you do when the people who raised you pretend you were never there? Would you still show up? Or walk away for good? Let me tell you what I chose. The lights outside my parents' house were strung up early that year, white, symmetrical, and soulless, like most things in the Greaves family. I parked halfway down the block, letting the engine idle for a moment longer than necessary. There was no snow yet, but the cold had that biting dryness only Boston's December air could carry. I adjusted the sleeves of my coat and told myself I wouldn't stay long. Walking up the path felt like stepping into someone else's memory. The house looked exactly as it always had: the black shutters, the manicured hedges, the brass knocker still polished every Sunday by someone who never used it. I let myself in. No one had answered the door for me in years. Inside, warmth wrapped around me in a way that felt hostile, too curated, too intentional. My heels clicked on the hardwood as I made my way to the dining room. They'd already started pouring drinks. Isolde was mid-laugh, something about real estate in Martha's Vineyard. Randall, Dad, technically, lifted his glass as if I hadn't just walked in from years of silence. "There she is," he said flatly, not getting up. "Still keeping us on our toes." I smiled without teeth. The dining table was set for 10, with monogrammed place cards and heavy silverware. Mine sat at the very end, different cardstock, my name misspelled. I slid into the seat. No one looked up. Dinner flowed in that way it always had. Well-practiced civility with a rhythm you couldn't disrupt without shattering something glass. I picked at my salad while Randall made his annual toast. "To family legacy," he said, raising his crystal glass. "To children who carry it forward." His eyes beamed toward Isolde, who gave a modest shrug like she hadn't orchestrated the whole evening. Then someone asked what I'd been working on. Randall chuckled before I could open my mouth. "Oh, she's still figuring herself out." Laughter bubbled around the table. I forced a sip of wine. I could have spoken then. I could have listed FEMA deployments, evacuation zones, or the 2 teenagers I pulled from a collapsed building last spring. But that wasn't what they were asking. They didn't want facts, they wanted distance. I gave it to them. Later, while dessert was served, Marilyn avoided my gaze like it might cost her something. Isolde leaned over, smiling with just enough venom to cut. "At least I didn't pass out during my med school interviews, huh?" It took me a second to remember the panic attack from years ago. Funny what they never forget, especially when they pretend not to remember you. I nodded, letting the insult rest between us. I didn't mention the time I helped her submit loan documents when her startup nearly collapsed. After coffee, I reached into my purse and placed a small wrapped box in front of Marilyn. "Just something small," I said. She looked at it like it had grown legs. "What's this?" "A birthday gift," I replied. "For last week." She didn't open it. She didn't thank me. That night, after they'd all moved to the den for drinks and reruns of last year's vacation photos, I slipped out. No one noticed. In the hallway, I passed the framed Greaves family portrait taken 5 years ago. Everyone was in it: Randall, Marilyn, Isolde, her fiancé at the time. I wasn't. Not even cropped. Just gone. Outside, the cold wrapped around me, familiar in a way love had never been. I pulled my coat tight and looked back at the glowing windows one last time. There was laughter inside. I didn't miss it. "I keep showing up," I whispered to the wind. "But maybe I'm not meant to be here." The last breakfast I ever had with my family was so perfectly ordinary, it could have been a scene in a catalog. Randall sat at the head of the table, his Wall Street Journal spread across his plate like always. Isolde, radiant in a preppy cashmere set, tapped endlessly on her iPad, scrolling through emails she clearly wanted everyone to know were important. Marilyn poured coffee into porcelain cups like she wasn't aware of the tension bubbling just under the surface. I had folded my decision into my back pocket that morning, not because I was unsure, but because I already knew what it would cost me. I just needed to hear it said out loud. "I'm not going into the firm," I said, setting my fork down beside half-eaten toast. "I've accepted a position with FEMA." Silence. Just the hum of the espresso machine and the soft clink of Isolde's spoon against her yogurt cup. Randall lowered his newspaper an inch. "You're joking." I wasn't. "After everything I lined up, you'd rather chase disasters than equity?" His voice didn't rise. It never did. But the chill in it could cut granite. I held my gaze steady. "I want my work to matter." "You walk away from this family's legacy," he said, folding the paper like the conversation bored him. "You walk away from our support." Marilyn didn't even blink. Isolde smiled faintly, as if I'd just given her the lead in a sibling rivalry she never actually lost. By lunch, I was packing. They didn't slam doors or shout, which somehow made it worse. They just proceeded with the day. Randall went back to conference calls. Marilyn replaced the sheets in the guest room, as if prepping it for someone who actually mattered. No one asked where I'd go. No one offered to help carry a box. That evening, I printed out the FAFSA forms at the university library and signed loan paperwork under fluorescent lights. It felt like declaring myself an orphan in triplicate. The next morning, I tried one last thing. A part of me still craved connection, still stupidly thought maybe this wasn't irreversible. I had written an essay, Service Over Status. It wasn't groundbreaking, but it was mine. I handed it to Marilyn in the kitchen. She read it silently, standing by the sink. I waited. Then, without looking at me, she folded the paper, tore it in half, and dropped it in the trash. No words, just disposal. Something in me stiffened, then calcified. I realized her silence was not a shield. It was surrender. She would never challenge Randall. Not for me. I finished packing in under 2 hours. My car was already older than me in attitude, but it ran, and that was enough. I loaded up the trunk, filled the back seat with books and bedding, and took one last look at my childhood room. It had already been stripped bare. The bulletin board was gone, the wall paint duller than I remembered. A storage bin sat on my bed with masking tape labeled "Donations." It took me another 30 minutes to get out of the driveway because Randall's SUV blocked part of the exit and no one offered to move it. I reversed in slow, careful inches, just like I'd learned. Control your exit, even when you're not welcomed back. As I pulled away, I didn't cry. I didn't even feel anger. I just felt distance. The emotional kind that can't be closed by apologies that never come. By nightfall, I was checked into a budget motel outside Cambridge, keys on the nightstand and my acceptance email from FEMA open on the cracked laptop screen. I sat cross-legged on the stiff bed and reread the subject line. "We're proud to welcome you to our team." Proud. That word had always sounded conditional coming from my parents, like a badge they handed out when it suited them. But in that moment, it felt different. It didn't fix everything. It didn't fill the hollow space in my chest, but it was a start. The next morning, I woke up early, took a walk along the Charles River, and bought myself a $3 coffee that tasted like water but felt like freedom. I thought about how many people stayed in rooms they were never really welcomed in. I wasn't going to be one of them. Choosing myself shouldn't have come with exile, but it did. It had been 2 years since I last drove down that street, and still, I took the long way around. I didn't need to, but I did. Maybe part of me hoped the house would look smaller, that the distance would finally feel real. But no matter how many streets I curved through, the driveway came up just the same, like it never noticed I'd left. I parked across the street from the Greaves home, my rental engine humming quietly beneath me. The house sat silent behind drawn blinds, no holiday lights yet, no signs of life. Just the same beige perfection with the same sterile garden out front. It was early afternoon. I'd checked their schedules. Isolde's Instagram showed her in New York for a product launch. Randall's out-of-office email said he was at a finance retreat in Vermont. The timing was intentional. I stepped out, tucking my keys into my jacket pocket, and walked toward the garage. My excuse was practical. I was retrieving a box left behind. No one had asked me to do it, and no one would care that I had. The garage door creaked louder than I remembered. It used to open with a deep mechanical groan, like a tired gatekeeper. Now it just snapped upward with too much speed. When it stopped, I blinked into the stale light and found the space empty. The Thunderbird was gone. That car wasn't just metal and leather. It was the only thing in that house that ever felt like mine. Grandpa and I had spent 2 summers rebuilding it. He'd let me hold the socket wrench when I was 13, even when I dropped it twice. I bled on that engine block the day I sliced my palm open, and he just smiled and said, "Now it's truly yours." But now there was just a patch of oil stains and a few flattened cardboard boxes stacked carelessly where the car once sat. The dust clung to the light in a way that made it hard to breathe. "Looking for something?" a voice called from across the lawn. I turned. It was Mr. Collins, our neighbor. He was wearing an oversized Patriots hoodie, sipping something from a Dunkin' cup. "Your dad sold that old thing last spring," he said casually, like it was a spare chair. "Said it was taking up space." I nodded slowly. "Right," he waved before heading back into his house. "Hope you're doing well, Venna. Don't be a stranger." I didn't respond. My throat tightened in that frustrating way where words want to come but know better. Inside the garage, I walked to the far left wall, to the old wooden workbench that hadn't been touched in years. Everything was where I remembered, except the wrench set was gone, and a cracked snowblower sat where the oil-stained stool used to be. I traced my fingers along the dusty edge of a drawer, then opened it, and there it was. A small envelope, yellowed but intact, wedged between loose screws and a rusted tire gauge. The handwriting was unmistakable. My grandfather's looped cursive. "Venna, when the time is right." I sat down on a crate nearby and carefully peeled it open. Inside was a single page, lined and folded with a creased edge. He'd written it in black ink, the kind he always used for Sunday crossword puzzles. "Kiddo, if you're reading this, something must have pushed you far enough to open that drawer. I wish I could have been there to see what did it. I know our family's got its own weather system. Icy fronts, unpredictable storms, and not much sun. But you were always the steady kind of heat. Quiet, but strong. If they ever forget your name, build something they can't erase. Love you always, Grandpa." I don't know how long I sat there. The air in the garage wasn't cold, but it felt like it belonged to a season I hadn't come prepared for. Eventually, I folded the letter and tucked it into my coat pocket. My hands felt heavier than when I came in. Walking back to the car, I noticed the side gate had a new lock. Even the garden had been redone. Sleek stones where the messy hydrangeas used to bloom. I unlocked the rental, slid into the driver's seat, and pulled the door shut slowly. For a moment, I rested my forehead against the steering wheel. I wasn't mourning the car. I was mourning what its absence confirmed. They didn't just sell a vehicle. They sold the last piece of me they never wanted to admit belonged here. There had been no call, no text, no consideration, just a transaction. I reached into my coat, took out the letter again, and stared at the line, "Build something they can't erase." It echoed louder than any voicemail Randall had never left, louder than Marilyn's practiced silence. I exhaled, long and slow. "They can sell memories," I whispered, "but they can't delete me." It came on a Thursday afternoon, sandwiched between a utility bill and a coupon flyer. A cream envelope, certified, with the name of a law office I vaguely remembered from childhood. The firm that handled everything Randall called real estate strategy and Marilyn called our legacy. I almost tossed it into the drawer unopened, but I didn't. Inside was a single sentence that reshaped the air in the room. "This letter confirms the revised list of beneficiaries for the Greaves Family Trust, effective retroactively to January 2 years prior." No warning, no conversation, no signature from them, just a file number and a notarized stamp. I sat there staring at it long after the sun had disappeared behind the pine tree outside my window. My tea had gone cold. I didn't need to read further. I'd been removed. The next morning, I made an appointment. I didn't call Marilyn. I didn't text Randall. I just drove to the law office on Newberry Street with a copy of the letter tucked into a manila folder. I wore black. Not because I was in mourning, because I wanted to look like someone who belonged at the table they built without me. The receptionist greeted me with a professional nod. "Ms. Caro, please follow me." The attorney's office smelled like leather and old tax code. He was polite, distant, and efficient. When I asked directly whether my name had been removed, he didn't blink. Yes, Mr. Greaves and Mrs. Greaves executed the revision just under 2 years ago. Your sister is the sole direct heir to the Greaves estate. I nodded once. Was I notified? He folded his hands. That would have been the family's discretion. There it was, just like that. Years of birthdays, holidays, college papers edited at the kitchen counter, meals cooked when Marilyn had migraines, gone because someone decided I no longer counted. He handed me a copy of the updated documents, thick and impersonal. I slipped them into my folder, thanked him, and left without shaking his hand. The air outside was cold, not dramatic snowfall, just a biting wind that knew exactly where to sting. I didn't cry. My tears had been spent in earlier chapters of this story. This part was dry and crisp, like paper. That was the thing about my family. They never needed raised voices. They used signatures. Later that week, I got a message from Lenny, a vet I served with in New Mexico. He sent me a screenshot of a listing on a local auction site. "You cool with this?" he asked. It was a photo of a military uniform, mine. My name tag still sewn on, the sleeves still rolled the way I used to keep them during drills, listed as unused women's army attire, collectible. I stared at the screen long enough for the colors to blur. I hadn't taken everything with me when I left. Some things had stayed in the back of the hall closet in Boston, boxed and labeled neatly. Vena, deployment gear. I had assumed it would still be there, assumed they'd know better. Marilyn had cleared the closets. No text, no email, just out with the old. I didn't rage. I didn't call. I messaged the seller with a calm, direct request to take the listing down. I offered to reimburse shipping, no confrontation, just return what was mine. I got a reply the next day. Wasn't aware it was personal. No problem, sending it back. And that was that. I spent the following weekend rewriting my resume, not because I was job hunting, because I needed to see, in writing, what I'd built for myself. Lines of deployments, emergency operations, leadership roles. I wasn't looking for a title anymore. I was reminding myself that my name belonged somewhere, even if not in their trust. That night, I poured a glass of wine and opened a blank document. At the top, I typed, Vena Caro, nothing else, not a role, not an address, just my name. Then I hit enter and started again. The new version would be written on my own terms. They had redrawn their estate, but I was building something else entirely, not a seat at their table, my own floor. The invitation came through email, an elegant serif font spelling out the Greaves Family Honors Dinner. It looked like a charity gala more than a family event. I stared at it for a while, unsure if it had been sent by mistake. Then a follow-up text from Isolde confirmed otherwise. We thought it'd be good optics to have you there. You know, balance, optics, balance, not love, not we miss you. Just PR symmetry. For a brief moment I hovered over the decline button, but something in me said go, not to make peace, not to belong, but to be seen, fully, silently, unmistakably. The evening was cold but not unfriendly. Boston knew how to dress itself for winter. Gas lamps, valet attendants in long coats, a jazz trio warming up inside the foyer of the Greaves home. It was the same house, but someone had repainted the trim, probably to impress clients or Instagram. Nothing about it said family. When I entered, no one gasped, no one clapped. I wasn't expected early, so I took my time. My name card sat at the farthest end of the long banquet table. It was thinner stock than the others. My name misspelled. Vena Caro. I didn't correct it. Dinner unfolded like a stage play. Isolde dazzled in a sequined burgundy dress, Randall held court near the head of the table, gesturing with that same confidence he'd once used in boardrooms. Marilyn floated around, managing wine pours and photo ops. Halfway through the entree, Randall stood to make a toast. To legacy, he said, raising his glass. To vision, to continuity, to the one who carries this family forward with grace and leadership. To Isolde, my greatest pride. The applause was warm, real. They meant it. I remained seated, my hands folded in my lap, a polite smile fixed on my face. I didn't sip. I didn't blink. They never even said my name. Dessert came and went. I had taken 2 bites of the crème brûlée before someone, a second cousin or a tax attorney's wife, asked if I wanted to say a few words. I nodded, dabbing my mouth with a napkin, and stood slowly. I don't have words, I began calmly, setting my spoon down. I have boundaries. A few chuckles followed, those reflex laughs people give when they're unsure if you're joking, but I wasn't. I want to thank the caterers for this beautiful meal, I continued, looking toward the staff behind the swinging door, and the florist, and the musicians. You all showed up and delivered, which is more than I can say for this table. The room stiffened. I glanced toward Randall. He blinked, but said nothing. Isolde pursed her lips. Marilyn adjusted her necklace like it was strangling her. This table, I said, running my hand along the linen edge, was never set for me. I've been invited as a courtesy, seated at the corner, named wrong, left out. That's not inclusion, that's display. A pause. I'm not angry, I added. I'm awake. I placed my napkin gently on the plate, turned to the staff again, and nodded with genuine warmth. Thank you. Then I walked away, heels clicking against hardwood, louder than I intended, but firm, final. As I passed Marilyn, our eyes met. She didn't say a word. Her silence, once a balm, now burned. It wasn't neutrality, it was compliance dressed in pearls. I stepped outside into the crisp night air, letting the cold rush over me like an overdue baptism. The night didn't feel like an ending, it felt like a line drawn. I climbed into my car and sat for a moment before unlocking my phone. I opened the Notes app, tapped the plus sign, and typed a title, Rules I Live By Now. And then, the first entry. I won't sit at tables where I'm only welcomed for display. The metal came in a navy blue velvet box that snapped shut with a sound sharper than I expected. Clean. Efficient. Final. It sat in my purse all night like a paperweight of silence. The Massachusetts Public Safety Council had called me 3 weeks earlier. I'd been nominated for Civil Responder of the Year after managing the evacuation of a flooded senior living complex just outside Worcester. There had been no speeches from me then, just walkie-talkies, soaked boots, and enough adrenaline to power a small town. When it was done, we saved every resident. The team said I held the whole operation together with duct tape and calm. Now here I was, dressed in pressed navy, sitting under bright lights in a civic hall filled with polished wood, honorary plaques, and folding chairs that still managed to squeak. The mayor handed me the box. Cameras flashed, but I didn't blink. I stepped up to the podium, adjusted the mic. Some of us weren't built to be seen, I said slowly, pausing between each word. But we still show up. It aired on the 6 o'clock news. By the weekend, the clip hit 2 million views. My inbox overflowed. Teachers sent messages from classrooms playing the video. Strangers commented things like, "You restored my faith in government workers," and "You reminded us what grace under fire looks like." People I'd never met sent cards to the FEMA regional office with handwritten thank yous. My family, nothing. No call, no text, not even a forwarded article with a dry, nice job. Instead, Isolde posted on Instagram the same day. Our annual Greaves Foundation brunch, $500K raised and counting for next-gen innovators. She smiled under a flower arch, her fiancé beside her, both holding champagne. I was tagged in nothing. I wasn't surprised. But I had let hope sit at the edge of my mind again. Stupid, quiet hope that maybe Marilyn had watched the ceremony. That maybe she'd said, "That's my daughter," just once. The next evening, I sat in a corner booth at a 24-hour diner on Route 9, metal still unopened in my purse. A waitress with chipped pink nails refilled my coffee without asking. She didn't recognize me. She didn't have to. She smiled like I was just a person worth seeing. I had saved a seat for Marilyn at the ceremony. Back row, near the exits. I hadn't told her. I just added her name to the list, just in case. It stayed empty. I kept checking it between photo ops and handshakes. Every time I looked, it mocked me. Not because she didn't come, but because I still wanted her to. Back in my apartment that night, I scrolled through the hundreds of congratulations. Then I checked my voicemail. Nothing from her, nothing from Randall, no surprise. Still, it pinched. I opened the voice memo app on my phone. I don't know why, maybe to exhale into a place that wouldn't argue. I wasn't raised to be invisible, I said quietly. They just never bothered to look. I saved it without playing it back, titled it, For Me. Later that night, I sat by the kitchen table and stared at the velvet box before finally opening it. The metal gleamed under the soft light. I ran a thumb over the engraving. They'd gotten my name right, at least. I took a picture, not of me wearing it, not holding it, but of the seat I'd saved at the ceremony, just the empty chair with a nameplate that read, Mrs. Marilyn Greaves. Then I posted it, first post in years. No caption needed, just the image. But I added one anyway. Not all empty seats are forgotten. Some were never filled. The invitation came in a cream envelope, thick as cardboard, and sealed with a wax stamp. Elegant, expensive, impersonal. It looked like something a wedding planner had designed rather than a sister. Inside was a folded note. The Greaves family cordially invites you to the engagement celebration of Isolde Greaves and Sterling Halloway. Saturday, 6:00 p.m., at the West Ridge Country Club. In small print near the bottom, a single line stood out like a bruise. Dress code strictly formal. No uniforms, please. No uniforms. It wasn't just a suggestion. It was a direction. And I didn't need a second to guess who it was aimed at. I texted Marilyn, just to confirm. She replied with surgical politeness. It's just not the vibe for this event. Hope you understand. Understand? I did. I didn't wear my uniform. I wore black. A sleek pantsuit that fit like armor and heels sharp enough to slice through memory. I arrived alone, parked in the guest lot, and checked my reflection in the visor mirror before stepping out. The medal was tucked inside my clutch, not for display, just for presence. The venue was everything I expected it to be. Glowing lanterns hanging from lattice arches, white tablecloths heavy with crystal, and guests who looked like they walked out of finance commercials. Isolde shined, of course. She always did. Hair swept up in a sculpted chignon, her diamond catching the light just so. She floated through the garden like a woman already groomed to be a wife, a brand, a legacy. I stood near the bar, sipping a ginger ale, watching it unfold like a staged play I once auditioned for but never got the call back. "Family photos!" someone called out. The photographer directed traffic near the fountain. Randall gestured to Marilyn, Isolde, and even their cousin from Atlanta. I approached from the side, waiting for a pause. Randall caught my eye, then leaned slightly toward the photographer. "Let's just do immediate family first." I froze. I didn't challenge it. I stepped back, like an obedient shadow. The pictures clicked. Laughter followed. I returned to my seat, which was conveniently on the outer edge of the patio, closer to the servers than the centerpieces. When the photos were posted online later that week, my name wasn't tagged. My face wasn't there. I hadn't just been cropped out. I'd never made it into the frame. After the toasts, I slipped away. The evening air was cooler now, the garden quieter. A few guests wandered toward the dance floor. Most didn't even notice I'd left my seat. I walked past the trimmed hedges, found a quiet stretch of pathway, and leaned against the stone balustrade that overlooked the tennis courts. From here, the party looked smaller, like a set, not a memory. A man in his 60s wearing a linen blazer and a name tag that said Brent approached me, balancing a plate of hors d'oeuvres. "You law enforcement?" he asked, with a smile more curious than invasive. I blinked. "Not quite," I said. "I've served. Just not where this family noticed." He gave me a small nod, like he understood something deeper than I'd said. On my way out, I passed Marilyn's table. She was cutting into a slice of lemon cake, her pearls catching the candlelight. She didn't see me, or maybe she did and chose not to. I picked up a napkin from the nearest tray, found a pen from the guest book table, and wrote one sentence. Then, without a word, I slipped it beneath her dessert plate and turned to go. The dress code was never about clothes. It was always about who made you uncomfortable just by standing tall. The train into Washington hummed low beneath my feet, the kind of vibration you don't notice until the silence between stops makes it louder. I sat by the window with my uniform folded neatly beside me in a garment bag, unopened since I packed it. The weight of it, of everything, rested quiet on my chest. No one came with me. No texts from Isolde, no emails from Marilyn. Not even one of Randall's backhanded remarks pretending to be interest. I checked into the hotel alone, not the luxury kind my family would have reserved for themselves, but a clean, quiet one on Massachusetts Avenue. The front desk clerk asked if I was here for the conference. I just nodded and smiled. Upstairs, I laid the uniform out on the bed. It looked more like a statement than clothing, each metal polished, each patch pressed. It had taken me a decade and 1,000 quiet sacrifices to earn it. Not a single stitch of it had come from home. That morning, the sun hit the marble steps of the National Ceremony Hall like it was announcing someone important was coming. Secret Service agents stood at corners. Rows of guests filtered into the hall in polished shoes and tailored suits. I stepped out of the black car they'd sent and walked slowly past reporters and dignitaries, not looking left or right, just forward. Inside, the hall was bright and vast, columns stretching like arms reaching upward, chandeliers humming with soft gold light. I found my seat toward the front, just behind the medal honorees. My name wasn't just on the program, it was etched into the ceremony's theme. The president stepped up to the podium. He scanned the audience once, then read his prepared words. His voice was measured but carried the kind of reverence that comes with knowing how rare this moment was. Major Venna Caro, he said, for her unshakable service, her leadership under fire, and her relentless commitment to those others forget. The room stood. A sea of suits, uniforms, and cameras rose to their feet. Applause cracked like thunder. The cameras panned, catching flashes of me seated still, eyes forward, not moving, not even blinking, not yet. When I finally stood, it wasn't just to receive the medal. It was to let them all see me, finally. After the applause softened, another speaker approached the mic. Jalen Crowther, one of the people I'd pulled from a collapsed structure during the flood 2 years ago. He was thinner now, scar still running along his right jaw, but his voice was steady. She didn't just save lives, he said, pausing. She saved mine. No music played after he finished. No scripted transition. Just a pause that carried the weight of memory, and then applause again, louder, longer, not for a politician, not for ceremony, but for truth. I sat back down, my hand brushing the edge of the velvet box resting on my lap. My throat burned, but not with grief this time. This was something else. Recognition, not just from strangers, but from a world that didn't need to know me to believe in me. 200 miles away, in Boston, Randall Greaves sat stiff on his leather armchair, glass of scotch untouched in his hand. The television played the ceremony in full. No one had warned him, no press release, no whispered heads up from one of his business partners. Just her name, my name. Marilyn watched too, her hand tight around the remote. She didn't speak. When the president called my name again during the closing remarks, her eyes watered. One tear, no words. Isolde stood behind them, arms folded. She didn't comment. For once, none of them had anything to say. Back in D.C., I stepped out of the hall into the soft evening air. The streetlights flickered on like the city exhaled around me. I didn't reach for my phone to call anyone. I opened the camera instead and took a photo of my hand holding the medal, light catching on the engraving. No caption would have been just fine, but I added one anyway. Turns out silence makes room for the right people to hear you. The apartment was still. No echo of applause, no cameras, No ceremony music bouncing off the marble. Just the sound of my suitcase wheels rolling softly across the hardwood floor as I pulled it into the living room and dropped it beside the couch. I laid the garment bag flat across my bed and unzipped it, revealing the same uniform I'd worn 2 days ago in Washington, neatly pressed, stiff at the shoulders, heavier now that it had been seen by millions. The metal sat on the dresser, untouched since I placed it there after landing back in Colorado Springs. It didn't gleam as much in this dim light. The curtains were still drawn. I hadn't turned on the TV. It felt almost disrespectful to fill the room with noise. I slipped off my shoes, one at a time, then sat on the edge of the bed. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just breathed. The kind of breath that stretches all the way to your spine and settles deep. My phone buzzed once, then lit up like it hadn't all week. 27 missed calls. All from Boston area codes. 17 of them from Randall. I opened the call log slowly, like peeling back old wallpaper. The timestamp started the moment my name was spoken by the president. The voicemails came in waves, one every few minutes. Then a pause. Then another, and another. I didn't play them, but one, transcribed by my phone's auto-captioning, caught my eye. I watched it live. You made us proud, Venna. We just didn't know how to say it. I stared at that line for a long time. I tried to picture Randall's voice softening. I couldn't. Not really. I selected all the voicemails and tapped delete. There were words I needed to hear, but not like this, not at the back end of a broadcast. Later that day, while folding laundry in silence, I saw a message request on social media from someone I hadn't spoken to since sophomore year of high school. Hey Venna, just saw the video of your award. I run a lifestyle blog now and would love to do a feature on your story. So proud of you. She was the same girl who once made me sit behind the lab cart during group presentations so I wouldn't throw off the symmetry. I replied simply, "Thank you, but my story already exists. You just didn't see it when it was happening." And I left it at that. As evening crept in, I walked to the park a few blocks from my apartment. It was cooler now, late October, with dry leaves brushing across the pathways like tiny paper memories. A group of kids were playing near the swings, laughing in that chaotic way only children can. I sat on a bench, letting the chill settle into my coat sleeves. I watched them for a while, and then, uninvited, an old memory surfaced, sitting on the back porch at 9 years old, watching the kitchen window from outside, waiting for someone, anyone, to call me in. I didn't know back then what I know now. It takes surviving being unseen. That's what it takes. Later that night, I journaled. I hadn't in weeks, maybe months. But the words came like they'd been waiting their turn. Not everyone who's late deserves a second chance. But that doesn't mean I'm angry. It just means I've already moved on. I closed the journal, placed it back on the shelf beside the unopened letter from Randall. Still sealed, still unread. It could stay that way. The envelope was creased at the corner, as if the sender had hesitated before sealing it. Inside was a short note written in blue ink and a USB stick. "Thought you'd want to see what the next generation looks like when they recognize something worth standing for," it read. Signed, Mr. Thorne, Civics, Glen Ridge High. I hadn't heard that name in over a decade. The clip on the USB began with the hum of a classroom projector and a shaky phone camera pointed at a whiteboard. Then the sound shifted, a recorded broadcast. My face appeared on screen, mid-sentence, from the national ceremony. Students, maybe 20 of them, sat watching in various postures of distraction until the president said my name. Major Venna Caro. And then something I never expected. They clapped. A few even stood. One kid said, "Wait, she went to this school?" Another asked, "How do I do that?" The applause wasn't polite, it was spontaneous. My name, the one that never filled a seat at my family table, now echoed across a classroom where I once hid behind debate team handouts. Attached to the letter was a second page in pen. They stood for you, Venna. I thought you should know. I sat there in my kitchen chair, fingers gripping the paper. The screen paused on a blurry image of teenagers smiling at a projection of my face. And for once, I let myself feel it. Pride without strings, without guilt, without needing someone else in the room to validate it. A week later, I spoke at a local women in service event downtown. Low ceilings, bad coffee, folding chairs. My kind of place. The audience was mostly young professionals and college students, their eyes wide but tired, like they'd already lived through enough to want more than applause. After my talk, a young woman approached me. She wore a navy blazer 2 sizes too big, sleeves rolled, hair tied back in a rush. I just wanted to say thank you, she said, fumbling her phone. I chose emergency services because of your FEMA response during that California wildfire. I saw your story years ago. She wasn't crying. Neither was I. But something between us was loud. We took a picture together. No filters, no stage lights. Just 2 women who knew what it meant to be underestimated and keep going anyway. Later that night, I created a new folder on my desktop, Chosen Family. Inside it, I added that photo. It joined a handful of things I'd been collecting over the years. A scanned note from a child I once carried from a burning building, a card from Jalen that simply read, "I'm still here because you were." There were no DNA tests required to belong in that file, just proof of something deeper, the kind of bond that chooses you because it recognizes you. I didn't need to be someone's daughter to be someone that mattered. The next day, I sat at a small cafe near the edge of town. No laptop, no noise, just a journal, a pen, and the last bit of coffee in my mug going cold as I replayed the classroom video again. The barista didn't ask why I looked familiar. She just gave me a refill and said, "That's on the house. I saw you on TV. My niece wants to be like you." I smiled. When I got home, I wrote the final line of the day into my journal. Turns out, the ones who stood didn't need a bloodline, just a reason. It showed up in the mail like any other piece of paper. Wedged between a credit card promotion and the electric bill, the envelope had no return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Randall's script was always rigid, as if afraid to let the pen curve too freely. I placed it on the kitchen counter without opening it. For 3 days, I passed it every morning while making coffee, and every evening when I turned off the lights. I didn't need to rush. Some things asked to be opened. Others asked to be left alone. I knew which kind this was. On the 4th morning, I finally slid my finger under the flap and pulled the letter out. It was printed on thick ivory stock, the kind people reserve for formal occasions and long-delayed regrets. The salutation read, "Venna." Not "Dear Venna," just my name. A name they'd forgotten how to use until it echoed across national television. The body of the letter was structured like a boardroom statement, phrases like "in retrospect," "despite differences," and "we've followed your progress with admiration." All measured, all edited, no sign of warmth. Then came the line that stuck. "I may not have raised you right, but I am proud of who you've become." No apology, just an admission packaged in caution. I folded the paper once, then again, and placed it beside my coffee. The sunlight hit it just enough to remind me it was real, but not enough to warm it. Later that afternoon, I opened a drawer from my desk and pulled out a much older envelope. The corners were worn. The paper had softened from time and rereading. My grandfather Eldon's handwriting was gentler, looping, full of pauses where emotion interrupted thought. I read his letter again. "If they forget your name, build something they can't erase." It felt like he'd written it yesterday. I held both letters side by side. Randall's was full of pride that felt more like guilt. Eldon's was full of love that had expected nothing in return. I placed Eldon's letter into a wooden frame and hung it on the wall above my desk. It looked right there, next to the map with pins from every state I'd deployed to. Randall's letter went into a box marked "Things I Survived." I closed the lid slowly and slid it onto the top shelf of the closet behind my first aid bag and winter coats, somewhere out of reach but not erased. That evening, I stepped outside. The air was brisk, late November in Colorado Springs, where the sky looks too big to belong to anyone. I wrapped my coat around me tighter and walked to the edge of the yard where the pine trees made shadows long and comforting. I didn't cry, I didn't pace, I just stood there. Sometimes healing isn't loud. Sometimes it's just choosing not to answer what once broke you. I looked up at the sky, the same one that had hung over my childhood and every silence that followed, and I whispered, low and clear, "You didn't break me, that's all you ever needed to know." The gravel crunched beneath my boots as I stepped out of the cab. It was colder than I remembered Boston being this time of year, the kind of cold that sits in your collarbone even after the sun rises. I hadn't told anyone I was coming. The Greaves house stood just as I left it. Pristine hedges, high windows, and that unmistakable air of wealth curated for display, not comfort. I rang the doorbell once. Randall answered it. He wasn't expecting me. His shoulders stiffened when he saw me. "Venna," he said, almost politely. "I won't stay long." Marilyn appeared behind him, her hands folded like she was holding back words. Isolde, unsurprisingly, wasn't there. I stepped into the kitchen, the one where I'd once been told I'd never understand the weight of real responsibility. The island gleamed like it hadn't been touched since a cleaning crew last wiped it down. I reached into my coat and pulled out a sealed envelope. No name on the front, just deliberate folds. I placed it on the counter. "It's not a response," I said calmly. "It's a record." Then I turned to leave. I didn't stay to watch him open it, but I knew he would. Inside was a printed transcript of my national ceremony speech. Footnoted, annotated, names of every life I'd saved, citations of news coverage, scans of community letters, each paragraph followed by proof. And on the last page, a single line. "Since you were never there to witness it, I brought the proof." Back at the door, Randall's voice caught up with me. I didn't know how much it meant. I didn't turn. "You didn't have to know. You just had to show up." Marilyn, still by the doorway, whispered, "I'm sorry I didn't stop him." I paused, looked at her. "But you didn't stop you either." I stepped out, the door closing behind me with a softness that felt louder than any slam. I didn't look back. The drive to the airport was silent. I booked a one-way ticket before I left Colorado. I didn't need to see Boston again. Back home, the sun was warming the edge of the mountains by the time I unlocked my front door. The house smelled like cedar and new paint. It had been mine for 6 months, but it already felt like a life I chose. 2 days later, I hosted my first workshop. 15 young women sat in a circle in the community center, notebooks open, eyes curious. We talked about emergency response, about quiet leadership, about what happens when no one claps but the world still changes because you didn't wait for them to. At the end, we took a photo, not staged, not retouched, just us, sweaty from planning drills, smiling with tired joy. I printed it the same evening and pinned it on the corkboard in my home office under the title, Chosen Family. It joined the others. Jalen's thank you card, the classroom still from Glenridge High, the photo of the girl who followed me into service. Underneath this new one, I wrote, "Legacies aren't inherited, they're built." Later that night, I opened my journal to the last page. They erased me from the will, from the table, from the photos, but they forgot one thing. I had the pen the whole time. I signed my name beneath it, first and last, in the same handwriting I learned from my grandfather's letters. Then I closed the cover and breathed in a kind of silence that no longer stung. It was mine now. Sometimes family isn't the people who share your name, it's the ones who show up when no one else does. If this story has taught me anything, it's that legacy isn't handed to you. You build it, brick by brick, act by act, day by day. I spent years trying to earn a place at a table that was never set for me, until I realized I didn't need their table. I had the tools to build my own. So if you're watching this and you've ever felt erased, overlooked, or underestimated, let me say this clearly. You are not invisible. You are not broken. You are the story someone younger is hoping to see. Keep going. Keep showing up. Even when no one claps, especially then. And before we close, let me ask you this. Have you ever had to walk away from the people you loved just to finally hear your own voice? Or maybe, was there ever a moment when you realized you had outgrown the version of yourself your family refused to update? I'd love to hear from you. Drop a 1 in the comments if this story touched something in you, or let me know where you're watching from. Your city, your state, your story matters too. And if this video didn't land for you, that's okay. Tell me why. Let's talk about it. This space was built for honesty. If this story moved you, even in the quietest way, please consider subscribing to this channel. That way, you won't miss the next chapter. We tell stories here, the ones that don't always make headlines but always make a mark. Thanks for being here. You matter.